everybody, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Patriot as part of the LOC1 series produced by LOC Precision rocketry. And these are all downscaled versions of LOC Precision's high power rockets. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. One of the things I really like about these kits is that they come with pre-slotted fin tubes, as you can see here, which makes aligning the fins a lot easier. It also makes it stronger. And instead of using balsa, they use a very thin plywood fin here. And so it makes for a very strong rocket. Now, the one thing I don't like about these kits is that they don't come with instructions. Instead, as you go through the papers that come with this here, there's usually a little slip of paper like this that sends you to their website, and then you download this sheet. And this is just a generic set of instructions for all of the LOC1 kits. And right, so let's go through and make sure we have the rest of everything in here. So we have decals, those will go on here and the end of the rocket build. Alright, in this package we have a streamer, and usually with these kits they also come with a Nomex chute protector or streamer protector here. I'm not seeing it in this one. Open it up, maybe it's folded up in the streamer itself. Okay, what do we got? This actually has a small parachute. Okay, that's new to me. This is the first one of the LOC1 kits I've seen that has a parachute here. And that's not included in the instructions at all. So this may be a little bit more fun than usual. Alright, and then, oh, here we go. There's our chute protector. So this is just a square of Nomex. And all these LOC1 kits use Kevlar shock cords rather than elastic. Alright, then we've got a coupler here, and it looks like we do actually have, I think this is just an extension here. Alright, we have a nose cone. This is actually in two pieces, even though it may be stuck together. Motor mount tube, and then in this package we've got the fins, engine retainer clip, centering rings, thrust ring, a bulkhead. Aha! Okay, so this one does have a payload bay. It's just not very big. Okay, and then a screw eye and our launch lug there. So everything appears to be where it needs to be. As I said, this is going to give us a little bit more of a challenge, simply because there's no mention of some of these details in their instructions. And hopefully this video will, in the end, clarify that. So I'm going to clear this away so we can get started on the build here in just a moment. Our first task is to build the motor mount. And you'll need these pieces here, and also have your body tube and one of the fins available. We'll see why here in just a moment. But the first task is to make a small line, 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the forward end. So I tend to be metrically inclined. I'm going to do this, but either scale works fine. Okay, so I'm just going to make a little mark here. And then at that mark, I'm going to take my hobby knife here and cut a 1/8 inch or about a 3 millimeter slit, which in this case is about how long I made my line. And then the forward end here of the engine clip is going to pop right into that. Alright, and then we're going to take the centering rings here, and there's no glue yet. I'm just putting these on to check size and placement. So I'm going to push the first one all the way down, or close to it, and then the second one is going to go just over the top of the engine clip there. Now here's why you want to have this body tube handy. When this is fully assembled, the two tubes are going to be flush with each other. Okay? But we want to make sure that this aft centering ring especially does not impinge upon the fins. So we're going to put this in. Okay, and you should not be able to see any of that ring there, and you can see just a little bit of it, so that means we need to bring the ring down. It turns out you've got to go almost all the way down to the end of the tube. I like to leave at least a little bit of space there. Okay, now this one up here, it's fine the way it is. Okay, now I'm going to disassemble this, leave that there. One of the things that does not show in the instructions that I like to do is I'm going to cut a notch that's as wide as my engine clip in this ring, just to give it a little bit more room to bend when we take the motor in and out. Okay, so I'm going down about halfway down the thickness of that ring there. Okay. Okay, so now I've got a notch there, and now when I put this back over my engine clip, it's kind of tight to begin with there. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to rotate this around. Okay, so there, that gives a little bit more play. So when it's down in here, it still has some room to move, giving me more room to get the engine in and out of there. Okay, so now that I've got that where I want it, I'm going to take some glue here, and you can use white glue or wood glue. I prefer wood glue for most of this because it dries faster and stronger. But if you have good old Elmer's wood glue or white glue or something like that around, there's really no reason to go out and buy another bottle of glue right now. Okay, so I'm just going to run this around. Alright, just use my finger to help smooth that in. And now I'm going to push that back down to where we wanted it there. Okay, so right about that point. Okay, and then for my forward ring, we do the same thing here. I'm going to put that into place and then bring it down a little bit more. Once again, put some glue around there. Okay, smooth that all the way around. If you get some up here on top, just wipe that off quickly. Alright, and then go ahead and push it up into the glue and back into the position there. Alright, again, just make sure you don't have any glue out here on the outer part of the ring. That will make it more difficult later on to seat it properly. Okay, and if you want, you can go ahead and glue the other edges here as well to make it even stronger. Alright, and then the last part we need to do is the thrust ring. Now, in most cases, we would put glue on the inside of this and then push the thrust ring in. The problem with that, as we've seen with our centering rings here, is that as you push the ring forward, the glue goes forward as well, and we don't want glue down inside the motor mount itself. So what I'm going to do here is just apply a small amount of glue. Actually, you can put a fair amount there. Alright, we want an even bead. And now when we put this into the forward end, the excess glue gets forced back out rather than in. Alright, so just push that down until it seats against the engine clip, and then try and keep it even. The side away from the engine clip is going to try and dip down more. Okay, so that's pretty much good to go there. For now, I'm going to let this dry completely, and we'll come back when that is dry to put on the shock cord. Now, while my motor mount is drying, we can look ahead and do some other building steps that don't require the motor mount. The first of these is the nose cone. And so here, I'm just going to take some plastic model cement. If you don't have this, super glue will also work. Although I just noticed here there's a little bit of a flash there from the molding process. I'm just going to take my knife and smooth that off. Alright, and then I'm going to run an even bead of glue. You do want this to go all the way around, but you don't want it to be too thick. Because if it's too thick, it will melt the plastic and distort the nose cone. Alright, and then I just take the base piece here, put that in, give it a twist, press it together for a few seconds there, and then this can also be set aside to dry. Alright, going back here to our surprise tiny payload section, which is this small tube here, and this coupler that's just as long as the tube. And now what we need to do is find the middle point of the coupler, and I suspect it's 2 inches long, which it is. Okay, so the midpoint then is going to be at 1 inch, roughly. I think this is actually just slightly short of 2 inches, but that's alright. Alright, so here's our midpoint. Okay, so this is going to be glued into here, like that. And if you look inside there, can we see that? Alright. Half that space then is taken up with the coupler. But all of the space from the bottom will be usable as a payload. And then if we come back to our nose cone though, it's going to take up most of the space above the coupler here. So you can put like a small altimeter in here or a big cricket, but it's not a really big one. Okay, so here what we'll do is once you've got it marked, we will put in a bead of glue around the inside of that payload bay tube. Alright, find your mark again, and as we slide this in, I'm just going to move it back and forth to get good even spreading of the glue until we get right up to that line. Okay, and inside, I've actually used quite a bit of glue. I'm going to go ahead and smooth that out. Like that. Alright, and once again, that needs to dry. Okay, if we come back to our small parts package, there's a bulkhead and a screw eye. Alright, now this bulkhead should fit inside the coupler there. Alright, now my glue's still a bit wet there, so I don't want to mess that up. Let's quickly test this. Alright, and that does go in there. And now I'm going to take my glue and I'm just going to squirt some right on that hole. And go ahead and leave a little bit around it there. And you can see it's coming out the other side. I actually want it to do that. And now I'm going to screw the screw eye through the glue, through the hole, and it'll come out the other side with a coating of glue on it. Okay, and I'm going to bring this just to the end of the threads there. I don't want the smooth part of the shaft going in. Okay, and then on the other side here, I'm just going to smooth this around. And mainly this is just to keep that tip from being quite so sharp there, and also help prevent it from pulling loose. Okay, now in the coupler itself, we're going to put a bead of glue just inside the edge. Try not to get too much in here. As some of my viewers have pointed out, I tend to use a lot of glue. Here you don't want to get too much though, we don't want to get it outside. And now I'm going to put this in. Okay, kind of move it around and then bring it back up so that it's almost flush, but still just a little bit inside the tube there. Alright, and I'm going to now let this completely dry, but when I come back I'm going to put a layer of glue right along that edge. Something else we can do while we're waiting for glue to dry is to sand the fins. And I prefer to use 100 to 150 grit sandpaper for this. And if you have a sanding block or sanding tee, this will help keep a flat surface. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is just go through and remove the soot from the laser cutter process. Alright, and then I'm also going to give the surface itself a little bit of sanding here. Alright, and once you've got that initial sanding done, you might want to drop down a grit size here. So I'm going to 150 grit to give a smoother finish here. You can even go to a finer grit like 220 at the end of this. Okay, and then you're going to want to round off the leading edge. If you want a lot of really good aerodynamics, you can also round or taper the trailing edge there. The tip edge you can just sand square. Alright, and then for my leading edge to round it off, I'm going to start by just sanding the corner edges there. And then just kind of roll my sanding tee or sanding block as I do that, and then just check periodically in cross section to make sure that you're doing it evenly. Okay, and then if you want to taper or round the trailing edge, that will increase your aerodynamics a little bit more. But it does make it more brittle back in here. I've found that a lot of times if I taper my trailing edges, after a couple of landings it starts to get chipped in there. So anymore, unless I'm trying for altitude records or something like that, I just sand them square. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with the other two fins, or other 3 fins here, off camera. Okay, I've sanded all of my fins here, and I'm just going to set them aside for the moment. My motor mount is dry, and the first thing I want to do is just give it a dry fit into the tube to make sure nothing's shifted where it shouldn't be. Alright, so if I press that in to where it is flush, Alright, we don't see any centering rings in any of the slots there, so our size is still good. I'm going to pull this back out. And in preparation for the shock cord, I am going to cut a notch in the forward centering ring. And this just has to be big enough to allow the shock cord to pass, so that it doesn't cause the body tube to bulge outward. Okay, that looks like it should be enough. And now I'm going to take the shock cord here. It's wrapped up in a little sticker. Probably can pull that straight through if I'm lucky. There we go. Alright, so go ahead and open this up. Make sure there's no knots in it. Okay. I've got a little fraying down here at this end, so I'm going to use it to tie onto the motor mount. So what we're going to do is just wrap this around and then tie a double knot in it against the motor mount. Smaller fingers are more useful for this task. Alright, I'm just going to snug that down. And I'm going to cut off a lot of the excess here on that free end. So leave about 1/4 inch or about 6 millimeters. Okay, and I'm just going to drag this around until I get to where that notch is that I made. And then I'm going to put a ring of glue around here. And I'm going to embed that loop of Kevlar into the glue. Okay, need a little bit more here. Okay, and I'm just going to pull that taut. And once again, set this aside to dry. Make sure we don't leave any glue on the outer rim there. Coming back to our payload section, the glue around the bulkhead now has dried. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to apply a layer of glue right around the edge here. And you can use some excess, because anything you got left over, you can just flatten out here against the wood. Okay. So I'm going to leave a coating of glue over all of the exposed wood, and that helps make it a little bit more resistant to the ejection gases during your flight. Alright, so once again I'm going to let this one dry. And that brings us to the parachute. Now again, they didn't give us any instructions for this, and every other LOC1 kit that I've built uses a nylon streamer. Alright, but this is pre-punched for 6 shroud lines. Alright, and they give us this woven line here that I assume is nylon. So the first thing I'm going to do is stretch this out and then make it into 3 equal length pieces here. So I've got just a little bit there. I can cut that. Alright, I'm going to draw the whole thing through my fingers here so they don't slip. Alright, and that loop's a little bit longer, so I'll just cut it off at the end of the other piece there. So now I've got 3 equal lengths. And frankly, these look kind of short. Okay, so if we were to actually go in and tie these on, okay, even if I can get really small knots in here, it's not going to leave me with much. Okay, I'm just going to leave that as a single knot there. Those are not very long shroud lines, and I don't think this is going to work very well. So we have a couple of options. One is to use some other shroud line material. The other would be to simply supply your own streamer and use a streamer like most of these kits do. Here I have three possibilities for replacing the shroud lines. I have some woven nylon cord, and this is just slightly heavier than what came with it, which is this stuff here. I have some 100-pound test Kevlar line. This is actually much lighter weight. And I've also got some embroidery, or excuse me, some crochet thread here. And this is fairly lightweight as well, but I think it's a combination cotton and polyester. But it should do alright as well. So if you got any of these, any of them should work well. The main thing is we need them longer. So I'm going to try this with the crochet thread here. Set the other ones aside. And I'm going to give myself 18 inches per shroud line. So if I'm going to loop the ends like they had here, each one of these needs to be 3 feet long. So I'll just take my ruler here and wrap this around 3 times. Okay, and then I'll duplicate that twice more. So now I'll just use the first one as a template. Cut everything evenly right there. Alright, so now I'm going to just take one of these to begin with. And you can either loop these around adjacent ones like this and go all the way around, which is common with Custom Rocketry does their parachutes that way. Estes always puts one across the middle here. So they would have a line going from that hole to this hole, right, and then side ones over here, whichever way you prefer. I haven't found that it makes a whole lot of difference. The trick now is making your knotted sides about the same length. So here I'm just going to tie a double knot, and it's going to bunch up in there. That's fine. But I want to try and be as consistent as possible with how much line goes into the knot. Okay, so there's one line, and that gives me a lot more line down here. Okay, now I could have gone a little bit shorter, maybe with 16 inches. But I found that having longer shroud lines doesn't hurt anything, but having too short of a shroud line can. Alright, so now with the other ones here, another pattern you can use is just to go across each time. But I'm going to go ahead and go with the Estes pattern here and go across and then have two adjacent. Alright, so now we just gather our loops together here. Okay, and what I'm doing now is stringing them all across one finger like that. So I'll transfer it to my other finger. And then I'm holding the parachute in the middle here. Alright, and all of these knots should come together at about the same place. And you can kind of shift each side of the lines there as you need to. Okay, and so you can either now tie these loops onto the screw eye and have it tied directly there, or what I prefer to do is tie them into a snap swivel. And so you can get some like this. These are actually a little bit too big. I'm going to find a smaller one. But the snap swivel allows you to change out the parachute for a streamer or for a different size parachute. So I'm going to come right back and we'll put that on. So here I have a smaller one, and so as you can tell they come in different sizes. I just get these from the sporting goods section of my local discount store. And so here I'm going to gather all the loops together and put it through the swivel end of the snap swivel here. Okay. Reform my loops there, and you want to make sure that you're not shifting the length of the loops going down. And now if you can see this, I'm going to take this whole snap swivel, pass it up through the loops, alright, and down again. And now if I bring this in taut, alright, then that snugs it up against the ring there. Alright, now I'm going to recheck to make sure I'm still mostly the same length. Alright, and I am. There's a little bit of an offness there, but that'll be good enough. And so what I'll do now is take just a little dab of glue. So just put a little dab of glue right onto the knot there. And just work that in. And you can wipe off the excess there. But that'll keep that knot from slipping. And then when you're ready to attach this to the rocket, in this rocket it'll go onto the screw eye here, like that, and snap in. Okay, so for most model rockets, low power ones here, the screw eye, or the snap swivel size really doesn't matter to the parachute. Even the smallest one of these is robust enough to carry, any rocket that's lighter than say half a pound. What you do need to worry about is the snap part. It has to be big enough to go around whatever you're attaching it to here. So if you've got, say, a big plastic nose cone that has a big eyelet, you may need something with a bigger snap on it, even though it doesn't weigh any more than this rocket does. Alright, so I'll let that set aside to dry as well, and when we come back we'll be ready to put in the motor mount. Alright, the glue is dry enough for this to be handled, and the first thing I'm going to do is simply gather up the length of the shock cord here, and then I'm going to stuff this down into the motor mount. And this will just keep it out of our way for a little bit. Okay, I'm going to bring that all the way down like that. Alright, now, before we put this in, I'm going to mark a place for my launch lug. Now in the instructions it shows doing this after putting the fins on, but doesn't have any particular place to put it. You're basically eyeballing it and putting it on there. I prefer to have something a little bit more definite. So I'm going to just take my pencil here and find a spot in between two fin slots and make a mark there. And then I'm going to use my edge guide here. You can just use a door frame or a window frame to do this if you don't have one. So this will allow me to get a nice straight line. Okay, I'm just going to make this about halfway up the tube. That'll give me a nice guide. And again, it doesn't tell us how far up to put the launch lug. Okay, so I'm going to call it 8 centimeters here. Alright, which if you're not metrically inclined, we spin this around, it's going to be about 3 inches or so. Now I'm going to take my launch lug and use it as a guide here. Alright, so it goes almost up to the line. And now I'm just going to take a bit of fine sandpaper here and just lightly sand that spot. And this will give a better gluing surface for the launch lug there. And then you can also do this at each of the fin slots. It doesn't take much. So this will give a good spot for the fillets to attach as well. Alright, so now to glue the motor mount in, I'm going to use an applicator here. Okay, and we know that it needs to be flush, so our glue for the forward ring should be about there. And so what I'm doing is marking this with my thumbnail down at the edge of the motor mount, which is flush with the body tube. So that's how far up the glue needs to be. So I'm just going to put some glue on this. Okay, I just want the glue on the head there. Alright, I'm going to recheck my measurement. And if you're going to miss it, you'd be a little bit low rather than high. Alright, now I'll put this up without touching the sides until I reach my thumbnail, and then I'm going to bring it all around the inside there, forming a ring of glue. Alright, now I'm going to insert this about halfway. Now my personal preference is to have the engine clip on the same side as my launch lug so that it doesn't get in the way of clips and such. Alright, and now I'm going to put some glue just inside the body tube here, and I can just shift that motor mount around to get to it. Alright, and it won't make any difference if you get some on the motor mount itself. And now I can push this fully in. I'm going to come back, make sure I'm lined up. Okay. And I'm going to use my ruler to make sure everything goes flush. There we go. Alright, and then you can see I've got my shock cord coming out here. I'm going to pull it all the way through. Alright, and let's see if you can see down in there. I'm pulling this against the edge where it comes out of the top of the motor mount so that this does not get glued. And now I'm just going to set this aside to dry for at least 5 minutes. All of the various sub-assemblies now have had their glue dry, and we're going to put the fins on next. And the first thing to do is go ahead and thread the shock cord back up through the body tube. And if you're lucky, you can just slide it on through. If it tends to stick or something like that, you can just tape it to a dowel and use that to stick it through. Okay, now before we glue the fins, I'm going to just put them in dry fitting to make sure they all fit. And you may have to do a little bit of wiggling or something like that in some cases. If they're not going in, then either sand the tabs here just a little bit at a time, or you can sand the slots in the same way. All right, but I think all these are going to go in without problem. Alright, so here I'm just going to take a little more wood glue, and once again, if you just have white glue, that is fine. Alright, I'm just going to apply a bead along here. We don't want to use too much or it'll just take a long time to dry. Alright, and just slide that into the first slot and then pull it back as far as it'll go. There's a little bit of play there. We want it all the way back. Now what can happen here is you might get a little bit of a gap either at the forward or aft edge of the fin there. If that's the case, we'll fill that in with a fillet after we get the fins on and dry. And so now just sight down the body tube and make sure that the fin is perpendicular. Let that dry for 5 to 10 minutes, and then you can proceed on to each of the next fins. And I'm going to do that off camera. Now I forgot to do it on the initial fin there. I'm going to go back and redo it. But you do want to put glue on these parts of the fins as well, because they will still glue on to the cardboard of the body tube. It's a little bit too much glue right there. Alright. That should go on like that. And I'm going to go ahead and continue the rest of these. My fins are dry, so the next task is to apply the launch lug. And here I'm just going to run a bead of glue down the length. And then I'm going to place that on the line I drew earlier in the little scuffed up region. Okay, and then sight down the line and the body tube and the launch lug all at once, and they should be all in line. If not, just adjust them accordingly. Alright, I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes, and then when we come back we'll put fillets on both the fins and the launch lug. Okay, my fins are dry enough that we can apply the fillets here. And I like to do facing fins at once. So I'm going to apply glue to this side and then over here. And it's a good idea to have a rag or some paper towels or such handy so you can wipe your fingers. And now I'm just going to smooth this in. Alright, making sure you get the edges as well. Just like this. Okay, and try and catch any stray glue before it dries. Okay, and then we can just go on to each face, and as long as you keep the rocket horizontal, you can do these all at once. If you put it vertically though, the fillets may run in the direction of gravity. And now I'm going to let this completely dry for at least an hour. Now I'm almost ready to put everything together, but before doing that you'll want to consider how you want to paint this rocket. Okay, so if we go by the packaging label here, this is kind of a copper gold color with a white nose cone. And so if you want to do that paint scheme or do some other, you may want to consider painting the rest of this rocket before doing the final assembly, because it'll be easier to paint the individual parts than it will be to have to mask it all off once the rocket is assembled. I'm going to go with something close to what's on the package. I'm not going to color the fins a separate color. I'm just going to do the whole thing in kind of a copper color. But I do want to leave the nose cone white. So I will paint these separately, and then once I've got that done, we'll come back and put the whole rocket together. All of my fillets are dry at this point, and I'm just going to check them out here, make sure we don't have any gaps. So there's a couple little bubble gaps right down in here where the forward root edge did not quite make good contact with the body tube there. A little bit of one there. Structurally these are probably fine. If we look on the launch lug, there's a couple of little bubbles in there, and again structurally it's fine, but if you want a smoother looking fillet, you can either do another layer of glue both for the launch lug and any fins, or you could use some wood filler putty there, or you can use some plastic model putty like this one here. These are not meant to give strength, but they do allow you to better contour the fillets to the fin and to the body. Okay, so that part's optional. My next task then is to prime this and get it ready for painting. My painting is complete, and I decided to go on with a uniform light brown or medium brown here. I think the actual color is called caramel, but I think this is going to match fairly well with what we see on the packaging. Okay, now these are some rather specialized decals here, and one of the things we want to do first of all is just rub these with something smooth. Alright, so I'm using the end here. Now the knurled grip, I don't want that on there, it'll rip it up. But what we're going to do is the protective paper on this will act as a temporary vehicle for the decals, and then we'll peel them off of the back here, and that will allow us to position these, and then once we have them positioned we'll peel this paper back off. Now let's see here, we've got, okay, so looking, I'm trying to compare this here. So if we look at the packaging and the placement of the decals, so we've got two sets here. So this long decal here with the U.S. Army on it then continues with the Patriot here, and this is going to run from almost all the way at the aft end forward to just below the payload coupling. And we'll have two of those, they'll go on opposite sides. Alright, and then we have some, these will be vertical stripes, and that corresponds here. And there are two types, so two of these are just vertical stripes, and then the other two have this little jog on them. I think it's supposed to be an access plate or maybe instructions to the user, something like that. And then we've got some pinstripes here. These are going to go at the coupling, so you'll have one above and one below the coupling here. And then the last one will go up here at the payload section. Okay, now I am going to still want to cut these apart, and they're printed or manufactured really close to each other here, so we're going to need to be careful about that. But we want to cut in between the two decals, but not cut the decals themselves. Okay, so the long ones here are going to go on opposite sides, and we don't want the side with the launch lug. So turn that 90 degrees and we'll start it here. And we'll see if I can get this to peel correctly. There we go. Okay, so the front of it is still stuck to the covering paper. Alright, now that excess covering paper may become a problem there. So I'm going to come back here. Come back here and cut that off. Alright, that gives me a little more space to work with here. And I'm actually going to use the paper there as my spacer. So if I put the edge of the paper there flush with the aft end, I think that's going to give me right about the space I want. Okay, and I've just touched that down lightly. And that looks pretty reasonably straight. And now I'm not going to pull the whole thing up yet, just in case I do need to reposition it. But I do want to expose the end here where this is going to merge with the other part of the decal, so that I can make sure I get it adjoining correctly. Alright, so now I need the Patriot part here. As I did before, I'm going to cut right around it. Okay, now once more I'm going to peel off the backing paper first, like that. Alright, and it looks like that part has been scored there. It's actually separate, so keep this on the backing paper. Alright, now what I'm going to do is overlap the backing paper here and set that Okay, that looks pretty good, pretty close. Alright, now I'm going to peel off the backing paper of this one. Okay, and go ahead and smooth that down. Alright, do that one as well. There we go. Okay, I've got just a little bit of a gap there, but I think it's close enough. So now we'll just smooth everything down. Okay, and then we need to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and do this off camera, and then I'll come back to the next set. Okay, so here I have both of the Patriot decals on there. And I really wish that they would have made this in one piece, but that's okay. So let's move this stuff aside. Alright, next we're going to do the vertical stripes here. And once again, I'm going ahead and just rub these with a smooth object so that they adhere to the cover paper well. Okay, now you can try freehanding these and get them evenly spaced, but I think what I'm going to do here, I'm going to pull this apart. So these should be centered front to back on here. And one of the ways that we could do this to help mark this for ourselves is to use some masking tape here. And I'm going to cut this into a few thin strips. Take that strip now, I'm going to put it right along the edge. This does not need to be completely uniform. And what we're going to do is mark this kind of like we would for putting on fins. So it just has to be at a place where we'll still have enough clearance for the decals themselves to go on. So I'm going to make one for the bottom as well. Okay, and now I'm just going to compare this to the decals once more. Just to make sure that I've got enough room, and I do. Alright, so now what you're going to need is a fin marking guide, and you can find these online. There's a couple of online books by Estes that are kind of an introduction to rocketry, and you may even find one inside some of their catalogs. Okay, I'm going to use this. This is part of Estes fin marking guide kit, and so you just need something for a BT50 type tube, and then just mark 4 places here, kind of like you'd be doing fins, and just do it on the masking tape so that we don't get it onto our paint job here. Okay, and now also like what you would do if you were marking fins, we need to have a line here, but we don't want a line on the paint itself. We just need kind of an imaginary line here. So set that aside for a moment. You can do this on a door frame or a window frame, or you can get a line marking guide like this one. This is also made by Estes. A piece of angle aluminum will also work for this. Alright, so I'm going to mark a little line here where I had my original fin marks, or in this case decal marks. But this will give me something to line up the decal with. Okay, so now I've got 4 marks on each piece of tape, and those will allow me to center my decals better. Okay, so just like we did before, I'm going to cut out the decals. Again, remove the backing, and now we just need to center it between the 2 lines. smooth that down. And we'll peel this up. Just like that. Alright, and it's still pretty centered there. And now we can also use this as a guide for the other decals. So we'll just have to line up those top and bottom edges. All right, and I'm going to do this in order so that I can use the previous one as a guide. Now with these guys, this is going to take some freehand cutting here. Okay, and the protrusion here should be on the aft end of the decal. And that looks really close, so I'll go ahead and smooth the rest of this down. Just like that. Okay, so then another plain strip will go here, and the second bumpy strip, I guess we'll call it. All right, we'll go over. I'm going to do these other two off camera though. Here I have the vertical decals for the payload section done. I think it came out rather well. Okay. Our last decals are these small stripes that are going to wrap around here again. And so one of these is going to go right below the edge here on the rocket itself, main body tube. All right, one is going to go here on the aft end of the payload section, and another one's going to go forward up here just below the nose cone. Now on these ones, I'm just going to peel this back. And instead of trying to transfer it with the paper, I'm just going to peel these off one by one. It's trying to curl up on itself there. Alright, I'm just going to start this over on the launch lug side of the rocket. That way it'll hide any overlap. Now if you want, you can cut off some of that overlap, but I'd leave at least a little bit because the vinyl may stretch and shrink with changes in temperature or humidity. Right, so there's the first one. Okay, and I'm going to do that same thing here and here, but off camera, and I'll be back. The rest of the decals went on without too much problem. And our last step then is to connect this all together. As you'll recall, I left the recovery system uninstalled to make painting easier. So first take the shock cord here, and then the chute protector. And we're just going to slide that through the little buttonhole they put in it. Okay, so run that down. Alright, and since we have a parachute, alright, and recall I put a snap swivel on that earlier. So this can be just snapped right onto the eyelet there. Okay, so now I'm just going to tie my shock cord on. And just put a double knot in this. Or 2 half hitches if you like. Go and go ahead and pull that tight, and then I've got a really frayed end there, but also we don't want this very long, so that it can't get caught between the coupler and the body tube, which might prevent the recovery system from deploying properly. Okay, and then Kevlar, as you can see, it's already kind of unraveling itself there. Kevlar does not hold knots well because it's a fairly slippery substance. And so I like to put just a little drop of super glue directly onto the knot there. And I'm also going to put just a little bit here on the edge to keep it from fraying. Alright, and then I'm simply going to wipe off the excess here, because we don't need any heavy amount there, just enough to keep that knot from going anywhere. Okay, and then we can snap on the snap swivel for the parachute. Oops. Alright, did you see that? I got my shock cord caught inside that. We don't want that to happen because it could cause that snap to come undone, probably at the worst opportune moment. Okay, and so now I'm just going to extend this back up, so I'm going to pull most of the shock cord through to leave that there. Alright, and then for my parachute here, let's see if I can get this all under the camera. I do have relatively long shroud lines, so I'm just going to kind of divide this into thirds, more or less. Okay, so I'm just looping these upward, and I'm going to wrap my parachute around the shrouds. Give it one fold over lengthwise, and then just wrap it in my chute protector, like that. Okay, and then we're going to stuff the shock cord down in first. Okay, so we'll just need to wrap up the shock cord, put that down inside. Alright, I'm going to regather my parachute here. Again, kind of wrapping it around the shroud lines inside it there. Wrapping the chute protector around the chute. And this is basically forming a piston here. And then we'll just stuff that in, like that. Okay, and then our payload section goes in there. That's a little bit loose. I guess that's okay there for now. Alright, and then if you want, you can align the decals whichever way you want to. And then finally the nose cone. Now if you're going to use your payload bay for, say, an altimeter, you will want to put about an 1/8 inch hole somewhere below the level of the nose cone shoulder, so down in this region, and that will allow free air exchange so that the altimeter is actually measuring the air pressure at altitude. If not, it'll probably still measure it, but it's going to be a delayed reaction. Okay. Also be careful of the nose cone here. This one is really loose. So when I go to launch this, I will check this again and most likely put a little bit of masking tape around the shoulder. Especially if you have something valuable in here like an altimeter, you don't want this to come out and fall down on its own. Okay, but with that, this is completed. I hope you had fun building this model, and have a great launch, a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.